But let's just go to Alex for a moment, because you had...
Hi. Since we're talking about size and perspective,
Yeah.
Isn't it that the more love, the bigger the things are? And was it in times of Amon and Amon that everything was bigger, themselves and the trees and everything?
It is true that their souls and their physical form was obviously better than ours are today. And also their souls were in a more pristine state. And they were the only beings that were, the only humans that weren't born. Right? So they were given a fully formed body. And so their birth, if you like, was like an unincarnated soul, like a child, put into a fully formed body. So they're the only people who've ever had that experience on this earth, a child being put into a fully formed body. But emotionally and intellectually and mentally and spiritually and sexually, they were undeveloped. They had to learn how to develop those things. So even though they had a perfect body that was created for them, and even though the earth by this stage had been well prepared for their arrival, so there was food everywhere, animals everywhere, creatures everywhere, in the place where they arrived, which was near where the Middle East is today, instead of it being like it is today, which is almost like a barren desert, it was a rainforest. It was beautiful. And we're talking 150,000 years or more ago on this earth. So there's been a lot of things happen to the earth since then. And in that place, so they arrived in this beautiful place, they arrived in a beautiful condition, but with no experience. And that's the thing you've got to bear in mind. There's no experience. There's no experience. They had to gather experience. And so they were like babies in an adult body. They had to learn that they could eat. They had to learn they could drink. They had to learn everything, just like you would if you were a baby having to learn everything. But they had an adult body to do that in. Does that make sense to you? Now, they're the only people on earth who've ever experienced that. So talking to them is very interesting, because you find out a lot of things about their experience and what their experience is like. But what I'm trying to do is hone you back into this thing of that there is laws and perspective. And why did I raise Amon and Amon? Well, because Amon and Amon were placed into this universe when they were unconsciously created. In other words, there was a time before they incarnated on earth, they were unconscious of themselves. They didn't know themselves. They had no experience. They weren't self-aware. And then as soon as they were placed on the earth, they became self-aware. And their self-awareness gradually grew as time went on. And of course, they then made choices and decisions. But in the process, they lost perspective. They lost perspective because they started to believe that they could be their own God. So they lost perspective. The perspective being that the Creator created this universe, and the Creator created the laws that govern it, and therefore the Creator was much, much larger than anything you could even imagine, because he's larger than the universe itself. He has the power to control the universe itself. That's how much power God has. Now, when you're in this throes of development as a child, you don't understand these things. And you don't even, and many people on earth, even as adults who are 70, 80 years old, don't understand those things. They still feel that their power is the biggest power on earth. Many of us humans believe we are the biggest power on earth. You know, often from an evolutionary point of view, it's called we're the dominant predator, the apex predator. Yeah. But God doesn't enter that equation, does it? And not that God's an apex predator, but God is far greater than anything as human we could ever imagine. and far greater, and all of God's qualities I've learned are infinite in their nature. And that's something, even as a human, on the entire time that I've progressed, I still struggle to understand, even though I've received a lot of God's love, still struggle to understand what that really means about God. Like, how is God this infinite creature? It's such an amazing concept. I know it to be true because that's been my experience of him. Right? But even though I know it to be true, my mind struggles with the idea of it. Right? And this is why your mind's no good. We talked about that last week in Brussels, how useless your mind is. Your mind was created by God for a purpose, to help you out, but not to become the dominant creature of your life, the dominant governing force of your life. Your mind has severe limitations. And this is something that I learnt in the first century, and I know to be a fact. Now, most people on earth don't believe that. Most people on earth believe the mind is the thing to develop. The mind is the thing to grow. The mind is the thing that causes you to make decisions. But it's not actually true, and we'll talk about that a bit later.